Lace, silk, pearls. This is how the stories of kings and queens are told. Perfect portraits that shine in museums, dresses that seem like works of art, wigs that touch the sky. But beneath that beauty lay something far darker. There was sweat trapped between layers of fabric, wounds hidden under impossible corsets, lice crawling through artificial hair, and even rotting flesh beneath the adornments meant to inspire admiration. Fashion at court was not a whim. It was a language, a gilded cage that defined who held power and who did not. Every dress, every wig, every jewel was a political message and, at the same time, a punishment for the body forced to wear it. Some, like Margaret Theresa of Austria, were made to wear adult garments when they were barely children, transformed into living symbols of an empire. Others, like the courtiers of Versailles, hid syphilis under monumental bolts. And with Marie Antoinette, fashion reached such grotesque excess that it became a symbol of decadence and mockery. Today we will look beyond the canvases and appearances to uncover what no one wants to remember: that dressing like a king or queen could kill you. If we go back a century before Las Meninas, we find another queen surrounded by myths: Elizabeth I of England. For years it was said she bathed only once a month, or even once a year, a phrase repeated so often it turned her into the dirty queen. But the reality, as always in history, is more complex and far more interesting. Elizabeth did not bathe as we would today, but she had her routines. She washed her face and hands daily and used linen undergarments that were changed frequently. These garments absorbed sweat and dirt, protecting the luxurious dresses that could never be washed without being ruined. Linen was, in a way, the secret soap of the era, but Elizabeth's greatest disguise was not in her dresses, it was on her face. The Queen covered smallpox scars with white lead-based makeup. Over this deadly mask, she painted red cheeks and vibrant lips. The result was majestic, almost divine, but over time that poison devoured her skin and hair. The face that to all was a symbol of purity and power was, in reality, a mask hiding scars, illness and pain. Yet, even if she took more care than legend suggests, the fashion she wore was a torment. Stiff farthingales that widened the silhouette, lace collars that chafed the skin until they left marks, heavy layered dresses that barely allowed breathing. Elizabeth knew that power not only had to be wielded but displayed. Every garment was a symbol of majesty, though it came at the cost of discomfort, pain, or sweat trapped beneath velvet. Her wardrobe was legendary: dozens of gold-embroidered dresses, gowns designed by her tailor Walter Fish, cloaks that opened like the wings of a mythological bird. Each public appearance was a declaration of authority, but also a performance. The Queen's body was the stage where England's power was enacted, and hygiene took a back seat. Perfumes, powders, and scented gloves were the true armor against odors and disease. Beneath the splendor, the royal body suffered, but no one was allowed to notice. At court, what mattered was not well-being, but appearance, because in Elizabeth's time, fashion was already politics. And, as we will see in 17th-century Spain, it could even shape the fate of a child. If in England fashion was the stage for Elizabeth I's power, in Spain it reached its most unsettling expression at the court of Philip IV. There, the guardainfante, that cage of wires and wood that widened skirts to impossible proportions, became a symbol of Habsburg majesty. It was not a dress, it was a wall, a barrier between the Queen and the world, a way of declaring that power was untouchable. At the center of this spectacle was Margaret Theresa of Austria. She was barely 5 years old when Velázquez painted her in Las Meninas. At first glance, she appears as a porcelain doll, blonde, with a round face and a white dress that dazzles under the light streaming into the room. But behind that innocent image lies another truth. Margaret was trapped in a dress that weighed more than she could bear, with hoops that prevented her from moving naturally. Her childhood was turned into a political spectacle. Every lace, every bow spoke of alliances, power, and an empire that still wished to appear invincible. The dress was not hers, it belonged to the kingdom. The child dressed not to play, but to be observed, judged, and remembered. That same fate continued into her youth. Dressed in finery, Pregnant and ill, Margaret travelled to Vienna to marry her uncle, Emperor Leopold I. What was a dynastic union for the court was a physical sentence for her. Still wrapped in silks and embroidery, now burdened by pregnancy and illnesses, she would die at the age of 21. Her image in Las Meninas endures, a symbol of Spain's grandeur. But if we look beyond the canvas, what we see is not just beauty. It is the story of a girl turned into a hostage of a dress, an empire, and a fashion that could be as dazzling as it was deadly. Fashion was not only luxury or discomfort, it was also propaganda. In Spain, the guarda-infante became a symbol of Habsburg identity, a garment that set them apart from French fashion, even though all of Europe saw it as cumbersome and grotesque. But when Maria Theresa, Margaret's sister, travelled to Paris to marry Louis XIV, politics were reflected in the fabric. In Spain, she had always worn the guarda-infante, that cage proclaiming power and isolation. But upon arriving in France, she had to abandon it. Her new dress had to conform to the French silhouette, light, elegant, and suited to Versailles' taste. It was a gesture laden with meaning. It was not just a change of wardrobe, it was a change of identity. The Spanish infanta was transformed into a French queen. That was how fashion worked in Europe's courts. It was the silent language of politics. Embroideries, cuts, and colors were not aesthetic choices. They were messages aimed at kings, ambassadors, and entire nations. Because ultimately, a simple change of clothing could turn a Spanish infanta into a French queen. Behind the brilliance of lace and embroidery lay a silent price: physical pain. The bodies of queens and ladies did not belong to them, but to fashion, and that fashion was often a form of torture. The corset is perhaps the most infamous example. It was not just a garment, it was a prison for the torso. It constricted ribs, compressed lungs, and pushed organs downward. The ideal of a tiny waist came at the cost of frequent fainting, respiratory problems, and, over time, permanent deformities. Courts were filled with women collapsing mid-dance, not out of romanticism, but from lack of air. Yet the corset was not the only executioner. In many European courts, water was viewed with suspicion, believed to open pores and invite disease. Bathing was avoided for months. Instead, intense perfumes were used, not to seduce, but to mask the stench. The most luxurious palaces could become veritable cesspools of odor, disguised under clouds of fragrance. Feet paid their price too. In Renaissance Venice, elite women walked on chopins, platforms reaching up to half a meter high. It was not fashion, it was a constant balancing act, often requiring servants' help. In France, high heels were designed not for comfort, but to signal status, though walking was torturous. Every garment, every accessory was a reminder that fashion did not seek well-being, but distinction. Dressing was submitting to a system that imposed beauty at the expense of health, power at the expense of freedom. Today we admire those garments in museum displays and think of fairy tales. But in the 17th century, behind the silk and velvet were scars, sweat, and broken bodies. Royal fashion was as splendid as it was painful. And history rarely dares to remind us how much it cost to look perfect. If dresses made the body a prison, the head bore another. Wigs, which we now see as extravagant accessories, were far more than fashion in the 17th and 18th centuries. They were power, politics, and disease. Louis XIV, the Sun King, made the wig a symbol of authority. His enormous, wavy, false hair became the standard at Versailles. If the king wore one, everyone had to follow. The bigger and more elaborate, the higher the rank. But beneath those powdered curls hid a repulsive truth. Europe was ravaged by syphilis, a disease that devoured bodies in silence. One of its most visible effects was baldness, and wigs were the perfect disguise. They covered heads full of scars, sores, and open wounds. Some nobles wore them over raw flesh, enduring infections that never healed. The heat trapped under those mountains of hair attracted lice and fleas, which found a paradise there. Attempts were made to combat them by dusting wigs with perfumed powders, but this only added more dust, more filth. When the body's odor mixed with that of a decaying scalp, perfumes were not for seduction, they were to cover the stench. In the gilded halls of Versailles, where everything seemed luxurious and radiant, heads were literally rotting under a sea of artificial curls. The wig, born as a symbol of health and elegance, became a grotesque disguise. That is the great irony of courtly fashion. Behind the splendor was misery. Nothing sums it up better than the phrase whispered by chroniclers in secret: the wig was a disguise of health over a sick head. If Louis XIV made the wig a symbol of power, with Marie Antoinette, that fashion reached its climax and its ruin. The Queen of France turned her false hair into a spectacle. Her famous poufs could rise over a meter above her head. True architectures of powdered hair, adorned with ostrich feathers, miniature ships, tiny gardens, and even allegorical scenes. Each hairstyle was a manifesto, a public declaration of boundless luxury. But beneath the artifice, the body suffered. Those wigs were not removed for weeks. Between the padding that shaped the hairstyle, sweat, grease, and dust accumulated. The heat and filth attracted rats and lice, and scalp infections were common. Some court ladies developed open sores covered in mold, hidden under tons of powdered curls. The image was grotesque, resplendent women in Versailles salons, while a repulsive ecosystem thrived deep within their wigs. What was fashion for them was decay for their bodies. And worse still, while France sank into poverty and hunger, the Queen appeared in public with these monumental works of vanity. The distance between the people and the court was literally measured in centimeters of hair. The pouf became the emblem of a world disconnected from reality. It no longer represented beauty, but excess, not power, but arrogance. And in the end, fashion became political too, because when Marie Antoinette was led to the guillotine, the people did not think of velvets, lace, or the perfumes masking the stench. They thought of a queen whose head was crowned with impossible towers of hair while they starved. The people did not see fashion, they saw arrogance. And so her head rolled. Such was courtly fashion, a dazzling theatre hiding pain, disease, and arrogance. Beneath the lace, corsets, and wigs was not just beauty, but broken bodies, wounded skin, and a stench no perfume could conceal. The attire of kings and queens was never mere adornment. It was propaganda, a wall separating the elite from the people. Every garment screamed power, but also revealed the fragility of a system falling apart. Today, those pieces rest behind museum glass. We admire their embroidery, their silks, their impossible colors, yet rarely do we think of the price paid by those who wore them, or by those outside the palaces who looked on with hunger and rage. From Margaret Theresa, suffocated in her guarda-infante, to Marie Antoinette, raising towers of hair over a people crying for bread. From Elizabeth Fils, wrapped in layers she never removed, to Louis XIV, hiding his diseased baldness under curls. The history of fashion is also the history of vanity, social distance, and, in many cases, the beginning of the end for entire dynasties. Because fashion can be splendor, yes, but it can also be a curse. And now the question is for you. What will people think of us in 300 years when they look at our fashions, our symbols, our obsessions? Will they see beauty, or will they see arrogance? If this story has made you reflect, give it a like, share the video, and subscribe to keep uncovering the hidden secrets of kings, queens, and courts, where history stops being a fairy tale and reveals its most human and sometimes most chilling side.